Well, now comes the part of covering early Doctor Who that can potentially be very daunting. Marco Polo is the first historical epic of the show, boasting 7 episodes in length, with every single episode missing as of this video. This means we have no footage bar some still images and telesnaps while I narrate the story to you, so I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. The crew land in 1289, exploring the snowy outside, unsure of exactly where they are. The Doctor is frustrated because the power in the TARDIS has conked out, which means no heat either, and he needs time to repair it before they can leave again. Ian and Barbara explore the surrounding areas as Barbara catches a glimpse of a figure watching them. They return to the TARDIS only to find out the figure has followed them, and they make chase, running into a small Mongolian army accusing them of being evil magicians. They're saved by one of the travellers with the army, the famous explorer Marco Polo. He's on his way to Shang-Tu, escorting the warlord Tegana to discuss a truce between his people from Khan Nogai and the great Kublai Khan. Also with them is Ping Cho, a young woman who is being led to Shang-Tu as part of an arranged marriage program with her 75-year-old husband waiting for her to arrive. Needless to say, she isn't keen on this, but she soon forms a friendship with Susan. Tegana doesn't trust the crew and advises Marco to watch his back. The other Mongols inform Marco about the TARDIS appearing out of nowhere, so he forbids the Doctor from entering their so-called caravan until they reach a nearby town where they will be safe from the harsh cold. Of course, they get there and Marco decides he wants the TARDIS for himself, using it to bargain with Kublai Khan to return to his home in Venice.
Why are you laughing? He means it. Doctor, he's serious.
I know he is, yes, sir.
So the crew are stuck with Marco as he travels across the Gobi Desert, hoping to eventually change Marco's mind before they reach Shang-Tu, or Peking as it's sometimes referred to. They go back and forth. Look, I googled it, I couldn't find an answer. Apparently Shang-Tu isn't even the real name. It was a misbelieved name or something and they just used it in this. Anyway, continuing on. It's revealed, however, that Tegana is actually plotting against Marco and doesn't want peace either, as he meets up with a man who gives him some poison for the water supply, as he wants the TARDIS for himself, believing he can win the war against Kublai Khan with it. 3 days later, the crew are in the middle of crossing the Gobi Desert, and the Doctor has taken refuge in his tent, refusing to come out. That night, Susan and Ping Cho get to talking and decide to go out to look at the stars, spotting Tegana lingering around suspiciously. A sandstorm hits suddenly and they get lost in the desert. This causes Tegana to have to change his plan on the fly and instead slices a cut into the water supply, draining it immediately, hoping for bandits to take the blame. Barbara figures out that Susan and Ping Cho are lost in the storm, starting to panic, but luckily they are rescued by Tegana. They receive a massive telling off from Marco as a result. In the morning, Marco finds the drained water supply and plans for them to head to the nearest oasis, which is several days' travel without rest if they want to survive. Tegana offers to go there himself to retrieve it, and Marco allows him to. Meanwhile, the Doctor is falling ill from all the travel and lack of hydration, so Marco permits him to stay inside the TARDIS until he feels better. Tegana finds the oasis and triumphantly pours the water out into the sand with no intention of bringing it back to the crew. In a stroke of luck, the Doctor and Susan discover water forming in the TARDIS due to the condensation, which allows them all to continue travelling. Marco doesn't understand the concept of condensation at first until it's explained to him. The crew manage to make it to Tun Huang, where Tegana rejoins them, clearly very angry that his plot didn't work. The Doctor reveals to the crew that his illness was actually a ploy to cut a new key for the TARDIS, allowing them to sneak out and escape. The repair is now complete. We then get a 2-minute long scene where Ping Cho tells them the story of Aladdin, which links to the nearby Cave of 500 Eyes, where in the story, some assassins chill there. Tegana slips out to the cave, finding the other members of the Mongolian army there, planning their next attack on Marco and the crew, theorising that the TARDIS could be used as a weapon.
Of course.
Barbara gets suspicious of Tegana, as somehow he managed to travel to the oasis and back again with almost no water, despite telling the crew that the oasis was dry. She overhears part of the Mongols' plan, but is then captured by them when they catch her eavesdropping. Tegana returns to the crew just in time for Barbara's disappearance to be discovered, and the Doctor is the one to suggest that she might be at the cave. He gets the directions from a local and goes there with Susan and Ping Cho. They do find Barbara's handkerchief though, completely unaware she's got a knife at her throat just through the wall. Susan then notices the eyes in one of the many faces on the wall move and lets out the most ear-grating scream you'll ever hear. Which I won't play for you, you're welcome. Marco, Ian and Tegana find out that they've gone to the cave and head after them. Ian then inspects the eyes that Susan claims moved and discovers a secret room through the eye holes. They then manage to rescue Barbara from the Mongols and return to the camp. Tegana starts to get desperate and tries to tell Marco that the crew have a secret key and that Susan is influencing Ping Cho to help them escape, which is actually true. But Barbara tries to accuse then Tegana of going to the cave before she was kidnapped, but with no evidence this doesn't amuse Marco.
This is your proof.
He decides to separate Ping Cho and Susan just to be sure. When they reach the next stop on their journey, the Doctor sneaks out to the TARDIS but gets caught by Tegana, who has brought Marco to prove that the crew are plotting against him. This now means that Marco trusts Tegana completely, unaware that he's actually planning to kill him and everyone else during the next stage of their trip. The TARDIS is now seized in the name of Kublai Khan, a power which Marco has been given but didn't really want to use unless completely necessary. The spare key is confiscated and the crew are forced into confinement for the remainder of the trip. On a rather quiet night, Ian plans to help them all escape from their tent, where they're held under guard. They want to kidnap Marco and force him to give them the key back so they can escape.
Supposing Mr. Marco won't give him the keys?
Don't worry, my child. I think by the time I finish with that gentleman, he'll only be too glad to let us go.
Did the Doctor just admit that he's good at torture? Interesting. Ian cuts through the tent and sneaks up on the guard to find he's already dead. Ian believes it's bandits that are responsible and goes to warn Marco out of good faith. Marco's actually grateful that Ian did this and he wakes Tegana preparing to enter battle. Ian suggests they throw some of the surrounding bamboo into a fire to create loud popping noises to scare the bandits away, perhaps improving their chances of survival. When the Mongols attack, Tegana is forced to kill one of the commanders of the Mongol army in order to keep his ruse up, figuring out which side seems more intelligent at this point. Ian's idea works and the other Mongols flee in terror at the sound created by the bamboo. Marco revokes his restrictions on the crew as a thanks for their help and loyalty, and Barbara recognises one of the dead bodies as one of the Mongols who kidnapped her at the cave. However, they don't believe they can convince Marco that Tegana is plotting against him. A messenger from Shang-Tu arrives with a letter for Marco, informing him to hurry the fuck up to see Kublai Khan because it's been 5 episodes already. Ping Cho walks in on Marco hiding the TARDIS key in his diary and swears her to secrecy. This doesn't work and she doesn't follow through and informs the crew who plan an escape with her help. They get so fleetingly close, but Susan forgets to say goodbye to Ping Cho and decides to go fucking back to do so. She then gets caught by Tegana and the whole jig is up. Ian takes responsibility for stealing the key in a desperate attempt to gain Marco's trust. Ian then tells him the truth about the TARDIS and that they're time travellers from the distant future, and this works. Just kidding, of course that doesn't fucking work. Ian didn't steal the key like he claimed. It was obviously Ping Cho and Marco knows this. She overhears this, fearing the worst, and flees the camp to return home. Ian goes after her with Marco's blessed blessing and finds her easily in their last stop. They discover that a group of bandits are actually planning to steal the TARDIS from the convoy to Kublai Khan. Tegana thinks Ian might try to steal the TARDIS himself, so Marco allows him to go after him too. Anyway, back with the crew, they finally reach Shang-Tu and meet Kublai Khan. The Doctor isn't so friendly and worshipping to Khan, and the two have a little spat, but they soon begin to bond over their old age and become friendly, much to Marco's amazement. Marco informs Khan about Tegana wishing to negotiate peace. However, Khan tells him that there are a number of soldiers spotted currently surrounding Shang-Tu preparing to invade, making Marco look like a bit of a dumbass. Ian and Ping Cho find the TARDIS and confront the bandit, but Tegana shows up, revealing himself to be part of the plot to steal it, and he brandishes his sword to attack Ian. They're interrupted by some soldiers of Kublai Khan who kill the bandit helping Tegana. However, somehow Tegana manages to talk his way out of another foiled plan to steal the TARDIS. Ian, Ping Cho and Tegana are escorted to Shang-Tu to meet with Kublai Khan. The Doctor ends up getting into a game of backgammon with Khan and wagers his TARDIS on the next game. If he wins, he gets the TARDIS back. He loses. Tegana arrives and tries to throw Marco under the bus to Khan for the way he handled the prisoners and the TARDIS. Marco reveals his plan to use it to get back home to the Khan, who isn't impressed and labels him a traitor. Ping Cho's husband-to-be dies, so she gets spared that awfulness, and agrees to stay in Shang-Tu as a normal citizen of Khan. The crew figure out through Ian's testimony that Tegana is actually planning on assassinating Kublai Khan, allowing his soldiers to storm in and take the entire city, which also explains why he wanted to delay the TARDIS from reaching the city, in case Khan could use it against him. They inform Marco, and word arrives that the soldiers are now marching forward towards the city. When they all arrive at the throne room, Tegana has already killed the guards and begins moving in on Khan. Marco and Tegana have an epic sword fight, or so I'm led to believe, and Tegana is disarmed, his plan foiled once again. Will he ever learn? Oh, I guess not. Yeah, Tegana kills himself after this embarrassment. Marco then returns the keys of the TARDIS to the Doctor, and then they all watch the so-called magic caravan disappear before their very eyes. Khan forgives Marco, as he figured out that the Doctor was a persistent bloke and probably would have won the TARDIS back anyway. As a thanks for saving his life, he agrees to help Marco get back home to Venice. We end on Marco thinking about where the crew might end up now, convinced of their time-travelling capabilities. So, Judging from how long that story was, you can probably tell that this was supposed to be one of the biggest stories of the show. It was on the cover of Radio Times, and millions tuned in every week to watch the continuation of the story, and I'm not kidding, millions. Elaborate sets and costumes were made, and both Carol Ann Ford and William Hartnell cited this as one of their favourite stories they ever did. Unfortunately, the whole thing is missing, despite being sent to more countries than any other of the black and white stories. Not a single scrap exists, despite being a big deal at the time of airing. It now has this reputation for being a disappointing story amongst fans, because we can't properly experience it as intended unless you were alive in the 60s. That being said, I still enjoy my time with this one. Firstly, we start to see a more silly side to the Doctor, which would later become a more prominent part of his character. For example, when the TARDIS is taken from him at the start of the story, what does he do? He laughs when he encounters an obnoxious citizen of a nearby town.
I could hardly have it placed in the hanging garden now, could I?
He makes fun of him. This is the first time that the show properly nails the character of the Doctor. You know, you've got all of the scheming and plotting from earlier, that's still there, as evident by his fake illness to try and plan an escape, but he actually seems like he enjoys the thrill of it all now. Obviously, a story set in China that was written and filmed in the 60s, the serial isn't shy of questionable moments.
It's a pity there was any association at all. That Chinese child makes me nervous.
Oh dear. But it actually manages to get by without any slurs or horribly offensive moments, which a later story with Tom Baker does not manage to do, but we're a long way off that one, folks. Mark Eden does a pretty convincing job as Marco Polo, with his delivery coming across as very ahead of its time. He doesn't actually feel like he's putting on a performance, he genuinely feels like Marco Polo, and you believe his authority. Tagana, not so much. Terra Nesbitt does his best playing the villain, but some of his lines are just downright difficult to execute convincingly, especially since he sounds like he's about to fall asleep most of the time.
Now you will follow us, and on the third night, I will walk back to you. Then we're going to ride back here to Lob.
We see Barbara get visibly horrified when she figures out that Susan is out in the sandstorm, having grown closer with Barbara, acting like a big sister figure for her. As discussed previously, this is one of the historic stories of the show, and it relies heavily on the educational aspect of the earlier seasons. I mean, that 2-minute long story from Ping Cho, all to tell them that there's a cave nearby that's kind of creepy and evil people might be there. Oh look, I just did it in like 4 seconds. I think a lot of people would admit from my run through as well, that it does get kind of repetitive after a while. Tagana tries to sabotage Marco. He fails. He tries again. He fails. He tries again, and so on and so forth until it's suicide time. But it genuinely didn't feel like that when I was watching it. The writing keeps things fresh, and Tagana doesn't try the same plan twice. He's like Robbie Rotten in that sense, I guess. Does that make the crew those creepy fucking puppets? There are clearly a lot of ambitious camera angles used to increase the scope and intensity of some scenes, although we're not able to see all of them. The small glimpses we do get are definitely fun. It just feels so strange to me that none of this story exists. For reference, almost all of the other episodes of Season 1 and 2 exist, bar 2 from the Reign of Terror and 2 from the Crusade. It's not until we hit Season 3 that we start to get into proper missing episode territory. And for this serial, like mentioned earlier, it was distributed more than any other, and it's somehow perhaps the one we have the least of, bar the massacre. We could speculate about this all day, and there are entire videos on this topic, so I won't go too over the top. Are the first 2 episodes still in Iran somewhere? They were never returned, that's a popular rumour. Also, the 7th episode gets thrown around in the rumour mill a lot too. I do honestly think we will see an episode of Marco Polo someday. I presume a collector has at least one hiding in their attic, perhaps without even knowing. All in all, I did actually enjoy my time with this story. It's well paced for the most part, and doesn't get boring with the narrative. That 7-episode length allows them to build upon the guest characters like Marco, Tagana, and Ping Cho, and they really feel like they're a part of the show and fully fleshed out, at least for the era. I think when some of this one comes back, or the BBC finally decide to animate it, it'll get reevaluated and a new appreciation for it will arise.